are going to start the recording in 3, 2, and 1. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Life Edge, because living on the edge is kind of what we do. Well, we're not really talking about the edge. It's the edge in life that's good for you. I'm joined today by Dr. Susan Nash, that smiling person who just survived a little funnel cloud. And she's smiling. Hi. How you doing, Susan?
Been there. Yes. Well, you should have been there. I was leaving for lunch, and I thought, well, I'll just go take a little walk for lunch. And then suddenly the tornado sirens went off. And I thought I better turn around, and went back in. But in the meantime, I was under. What? This is unusual. Okay. And so, anyway, should we start over?
No, we're okay.
Okay, so anyway, we have a mystery guest for next time. You'll saw a little bit of Skype, so that's a little bit of preview.
Yes.
But at any rate, so I survived yet another encounter with Oklahoma weather.
Wow. Well, anyway, we just had Dr. Clarence Benish on, but unfortunately, he was having a microphone issue. His microphone did not like either the AC or something in that room, and we couldn't hear him. So he'll be on another time, but Susan and I decided to do a short show, and she promised to grill me. Let's do our introduction, then she can prepare the deadly instruments. Here we go. And we're back. Susan, you said you want to grill me. You want to?
I do.
Okay.
So I have a few questions. We started to talk about how the mind makes meaning in a couple of our shows that were a few back, like Bill Fairhurst was one, and then with Mike Raines. And you mentioned that it's all about patterns and pattern making and pattern recognition.
Yes.
So I was just would love for you to elaborate.
They've done enough, back in the old days, a lot of the people who studied philosophy or mysticism or anything else kind of came up on the concept of patterns or habits way before we really, from a neuroscience point of view, started understanding that the brain can actually look at patterns and our cortex can store them. And for example, here's a typical example. You walk down the street, and you see what you don't know yet. You see something green on the street that looks like a snake. So in our as you go through V1, our first visual receptor, it's kind of blurry. And you're not sure what it is, but there's an immediate, minute touch of adrenaline that might say, snake. As you go to V2, the next visual receptor in the brain, now it's a lot clearer. It's like pressing the shutter release on a camera. When you first look, it's kind of blurry. Then you start pressing the shutter release halfway, and now that image is becoming in focus. And you go, oh, not snake. Look in the cortex. What is this? Oh, it's a garden hose. And by the time it gets to, I forgot what it is right now. It goes from V1, V2, it goes into another sensor where now you've got recognition of the object. It's a pattern. In your brain, the pattern at first was very primordial. It was a fight or flight response. Microseconds it takes to do this, maybe even nanoseconds. It's that quick. So it looks, it decides to figure out what it is, and then it analyzes and says, safe, or run, fight or flight. And really, most of our lives are based on patterns. When we see things, they say the smarter someone is, and I shouldn't say the word smarter, the more productive somebody can be is because they can recognize maybe more patterns together. Patterns link to each other. So in our brains, patterns can link to each other. So memories are basically patterns. The way we look at patterns, we connect them to other patterns. And then again, we have composites. So you have, maybe I look at you and I say, blonde. glasses, lipstick, facial structure, shoulders, clothing, and I go, female. So maybe the initial pattern recognition is female. Then as you continue forth, it's not just a female, it's a female who's wearing glasses, she has blonde hair, and in my database, I know who she is. That pattern is Susan. But that pattern, maybe the first second I see you is not quite there. There's a slight blur, maybe just a really microscopic blur. We're not even aware of it more often than not. And then there's recognition. So patterns, habits are formed by not only the patterns that we see and we understand and we analyze, and there's even some thought that there may be patterns already instinctively in us. Maybe in our DNA we have some patterns already built there, because why would we react to certain things without even knowing what it is?
Well, definitely, like Canada geese definitely have patterns already built in. But I'm going to toy with you a little bit. Okay. So Dr. Benish, who will be on later, we couldn't today because of technical difficulties, is an actor among many other things. But one of the things he does is he does impersonations or impressions of other people, or kind of like performance art. But he manipulates the patterns he expects in the audience. He manipulates his image to align with expected patterns. Yeah. So that's a fascinating kind of way to approach the patterns and meaning making process. It's like,
yeah, or even look at what magicians do, or hypnotists. Magicians distract you. They change what they're doing so that you don't really notice what patterns they're moving, what objects they're in. The object is a pattern. It's something you recognize. Pulling a rabbit out of a hat is not that hard for them, because maybe the rabbit's somewhere else and they just open a door and he comes out as a trick hat or something, or he's in the hat but hidden inside of a trick layer. They do all that kind of stuff, but they do it quickly. They do it fast. That's why they call it sleight of hand. Their hands are very fast. They're very well trained, and they can scam you into believing you're seeing something that wasn't there in the first place, or was there but wasn't. And it's all about how they move your consciousness, your ability to focus into different areas while they change the pattern of what you're expecting. Wait a minute, that hat was empty. Sure, but there was a fake door there. You never see the person when he goes in flip the door open.
Well, exactly. And then I've been really interested in how people persuade, and extreme persuasion would be the con artist, the grifter, and they toy with patterns as well. They manipulate patterns.
They do, and because in our brains, this is another important part of patterns. We have senses. Each of those senses is basically a 0 or 1 pulse. Just like in a computer, you have zeros and ones. It's a binary sense. But when it comes in, if you have a visual stimulus, you're seeing it with your eyes. That's one sense. If you are feeling something, you're feeling it with your hands. That's a different sense. If someone's touching you, that's a receptor sense. But the brain actually analyzes it exactly the same way. And yet what's fascinating is the brain can differentiate between sensor in the arm, sensor in the eyes, sensor here, but it's really feeling the pulses and changing it. They've done research where they could put visual receptors on somebody's arm, just a sensor. It's an electronic chip that has visual receptors, and people can see out of their arms. Fascinating.
Oh, I love that.
Fascinating.
That's really
because
great.
in these experiments, the way our brains analyze, you may go through V1, V2, but there's also other receptors that analyze the same thing. Have you ever noticed that maybe you're in the dark and you need a flashlight and you touch around your bed or something, and the minute you feel it, maybe you only feel a part of it, but you know that's the flashlight. You know it by tact, by the tactile feeling of it's a cylinder, it's long, it's short, it's because you know what kind of flashlight you have, but just by that one touch, you know exactly where the rest is. In martial arts practice, a lot of times, and as you know, I've taught and practiced martial arts for a long time, part of it is you feel things. So, for example, if somebody were to throw a punch at you, you could block it, but you're also now feeling. The minute you touch that arm, you know exactly where the rest of the body is. Exactly, because the arm conforms to a certain amount of physics. The arm is, unless somebody's totally disjointed or something else, you have a 99% chance of knowing exactly where every part of that body is just by one touch.
Oh, absolutely. And what's fascinating is that connection. I mean, if you're searching for something, you've already prepared your mind and you've already developed that pattern that you expect.
Yeah.
But say I started to play the piano when I was 5, and I could read music before I could actually read words, which is an interesting way to, like, I guess, develop one's mind.
Yeah.
And so I automatically began to connote physical action with a response, which was auditory, and then connecting that with, like, muscle memory. And I know that, like, when I was learning tennis and trying to really hit shots, if I focused on getting a certain sound out of the racket, especially on a two-handed backhand, it was an amazing difference. Instead of just focusing on trying to think of all the elements that go into the backhand.
And think about that. Think about all of those elements. You've got wind, you've got the ball, you've got the sound of the racket, you've got the amount of force you're putting into that racket, which is causing, mass times acceleration. That's force. And all of that is happening instantly, literally in nanoseconds in your brain, and you know exactly how you performed, where it's going, what you've done. And think of how fast our brains are to process all of those records of information, all of those patterns into one fine, fast movement.
Well, and in the case of tennis and backhand, for example, I would sit around, I have the right grip, have a footwork, are my knees bent, what am I, if I think about all that catalog of things, it suddenly I become slow. But if I just focus only on the sound,
then you're there.
And when all those things that go into making that sound are there, but I don't have to separate them out. It's fascinating.
Well, there was an article I read, actually it was a book I was reading once about a person who was writing about his experiences during the Hitler times. He was a Jew, and he went to one of the early, talks that Hitler gave, and they were very hypnotic, people said. They were very rousing. And he's sitting there in the thing going, yeah, kill the Jews, yes, kill the Jews. And he goes, wait, I'm a Jew.
Oh, no.
And he said at that moment, he realized how powerful that crowd mentality and the way he was using words to rouse them was, to rile them up. And then he left thinking, we're in trouble. And that's and he was writing that book, and I can't remember what the author's name was. Really fascinating. But think of how one person's manipulating the patterns of a whole group of people through words. And words, what are words? Sound, energy. You can say, stop, little junior, stop. And the junior's not going to pay any attention to you. But if you go, stop, now you've got attention. Because
my attention.
your words now carry force. They carry meaning. And for example, in police action, they're taught to use their voices to control a situation. And that could be command and control, where you are loud, you are commanding, or it could be just the opposite. You lower your voice, you calm down. Okay, listen, let's take it easy. Let's not go there. So it's knowing how to use your voice. And those are patterns again. Patterns of behavior, patterns of, we respond much worse to a scream than we do to a calm voice.
Well, I think that what's fascinating, I'm thinking again of Dr. Benish, when I'm going to spoil it if
don't spoil it.
But anyway, okay. But let's say an actor who knows in which key elements to incorporate of the pattern, not the entire pattern, just the specific elements. That takes a lot of skill.
Well, think of the Phantom of the Opera. Remember that one?
Yes.
All he had was a little teeny-weeny half mask on. And yet, the minute he put that mask on, you knew he was no longer the nice guy. He's all of a sudden the Phantom. And it changes. Just that little half mask. Obviously, I'm talking about the play, but just that one little thing all of a sudden made him different.
Oh, it's so powerful. And also the thing about creativity in patterns is that one of the exercises that people do to come up with creative problems is they put two completely different things together, and they try to find out what they have in common, or try to unite the two. And that's all about establishing patterns too, or finding patterns revealing patterns.
Yeah, and look at everything we do. Why are habits so hard to break? Because habits are patterns that are ingrained. And here's another thing that happens with the brain. The brain grooves. It's like creating roads. As the dendrites shoot from one nerve to another, if they shoot constantly the same thing over and over and over and over again, now the brain has a grooved behavior or a grooved response to something, because it's happened over and over and over again. Now, that could be good in some cases, but let's say you have an addictive personality. You're addicted to drugs, you're addicted to alcohol, or whatever else. When something doesn't go right, you immediately retrieve the pattern that looks for the comfort of that short-term solution. But it's a pattern. It's a pattern, and the brain is grooved to find pleasure or comfort in something that works maybe for a moment. But in that moment, that's the only thing the brain has. It doesn't know how to find pleasure or comfort in something else. And that's why, if you look at Alcoholics Anonymous, for example, one of the things that they focus on is replacing one habit, whether a good one or a bad one, with a different one, usually religion. Because religion is also another addictive pattern that creates a sense of pleasure or happiness or security, the security pattern. And again, the brain, when it doesn't know what to do with something, resorts to, let me have a religious feeling at the moment because now I feel secure. And that replaces the other pattern of, I need a drink because I'm unhappy. So, you're replacing one habit or pattern with another one. One may be more beneficial to you, but it's interesting how really the patterns are replaced. So a lot of times patterns are replaced by other habits. There is a psychological treatment called EMDR, eye motion desensitization reprocessing. And they use that a lot in PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. People who've been in war, have been in accidents, have experienced anything that's very strong emotionally. It's very hard to remove that pattern in the brain. There's a grooved response. I knew a girl one time that was, the minute she heard a siren, she would just bend over and grab her head. Total fear, because she had lost a boyfriend in an accident, and that sound of the ambulance kept reproducing that memory.
Well, here's an example for me. Okay, let's say my dissentiment is my worst enemy. And so you wouldn't believe this by the amount that I travel, but I sometimes have tremendous travel anxiety. And it's not, once I'm through security and once I'm in the airport, I'm usually fine.
Right.
It's all the things that go into it. So I find I have this conditioned response to even thinking about security and all the things I have to go through. So I've thought about like cognitive therapy. That's about recognizing my patterns, my patterns of thought. And I've thought about trying to reward myself in certain ways, or doing kind of meditation. Yeah, all those things sort of help, but there's still that big groove. What do I do? Which is funny because you like traveling. I know. Now I'll tell you, just so you don't feel alone, I have a little bit of the same issue. I never had it before, but as I've gotten older. And I hate traveling now because you have to go through all the stupidity of the TSA and everything else. It's like really, I find it bothersome, and it really irritates the heck out of me. And I go through it. I'm very friendly. I just don't like it. Mm-hmm. And before traveling, I just go, okay, let's cancel the trip. I'm always thinking, let's just cancel. I don't want to go. And then once I'm done, I'm good. It's just getting to that place where I'm now waiting for the plane. I don't mind flying. I don't mind any of that. I just don't like the getting there. I keep fantasizing about just canceling and being able to like just play tennis instead. Yeah, and so I understand it, and it's something in the whole travel scenario now that's not as pleasant as it used to be. I used to love traveling. I didn't even mind going to the airport, going through security. It was easy. Now it's more onerous and for no real reason. And you go, okay. I mean, think of it.
We go through airport security to protect us from bombs and everything else, but we don't stop our borders from being invaded on a hourly and second by second basis. So where's the logic in that? So anyway, that's another point. But the thing is, yeah, we all have our little anxieties of what we don't like, what we do like, what makes us feel well, what makes us feel uncomfortable. And usually you can bring it back to a pattern. Something somewhere caused that. What was it? I'm not sure. I think I know what it was in my case. I got to a different country. I got to Argentina, actually. And when I got there, my U.S. passport, they said, no, we're not going to accept it. What? And they said, no. And they marked me as Argentine. I was born in Argentina, but I'm a U.S. naturalized citizen for a long time. And they wouldn't take it. And I got stuck for 10 days trying to get out of the country. I finally did it.
Oh my gosh.
But it took a lot of effort, and the vacation went down the tubes. It just spent all day long waiting in lines trying to get my documentation right for no reason other than they were unhappy with the U.S. because of the Falklands War. I go, great. And so they punished everybody who naturalized at one point or other. I go, well, that's stupid, but okay. Yes, punish those uninvolved, but that's typical countries and governments. So I think ever since then, I'm just a little more nervous traveling. I don't know why. It's like, oh, God, where am I going now? Am I going to get stopped? So, yeah, things like that can happen, and it's a pattern. Mm-hmm. You can get around the patterns, and I've just gotten to the point, I'm not as anxious as I was. I just go, okay, fine, I'm just going to do it. We're done. And I used to be terrified giving talks or speeches when I was younger. And then I one day said, I'm just going to do it. And I forced myself to get rid of the fear of being in front of people. And it was fear. A lot of people have that fear of speaking in public. Most people who know me now go, you were shy? Yep, very shy. Now I'm not. But time has passed. I think the shyness just fell off. It just got old. But that's the pattern. That's a pattern that you feel that somehow, if you can find a different pattern to change that around, then all of a sudden you won't have that issue. The grooving part in the brain happens after a lot of repetition. And then it's hard to break that. Well, EMDR uses not hypnosis, but they use an object to kind of keep your attention. They also use a little bit of electrostimulation on your hands or something else, and they make you relive a horrible memory over and over and over until it loses its grip on you.
Clockwork Orange.
Kind of. But once they make you relive it over and over, the desensitization part comes in.
Okay, because like in that case, he never went to desensitization. It was all aversion therapy.
Right. In this case, it's desensitization so that it doesn't control you anymore. They regroove that memory into, it's just a memory. It's not something that kills you. And they've had great success. I've actually recommended a couple of people I know who had either child abuse growing up or just a very rough childhood. And it really helped. I mean, night and day. And there was only like 8 weeks of once a week sessions. And I could really say these people had night and day experiences. And I know veterans who've been through it, and it's helped them get rid of the nightmares, get rid of sometimes the thinking I'm back in war.
Right.
Because you're switching that emotion from I'm in war to I was in war. I'm okay now.
Well, and I think also the associated horror and helplessness of seeing your buddies die, etc.
Mm-hmm. Or just anything, or even you being hurt, or the sounds of war are very loud. Not like a movie or TV. You can go to a nice theater. It sounds sort of scary, but it's nothing like being there in real life.
And repression does not work. For example, I saw a little puppy being run over, and I felt relatively responsible, even though I don't think I was, but anyway, so the response of my friend was to say, don't think about it, that's over, that didn't, let's close the chapter. Well, that doesn't quite work for me. So I had to go through it a different way and say, okay, poor little thing sacrificed his life for the greater good. I had to come up with some narrative to come up with, because just squelching that memory doesn't work for me.
Right. But everybody's different, and everybody reacts and holds on to things in a different way. But again, part of that's the way we, part of it's genetic, how we are, who we are, what influenced us growing up. What patterns did you see or feel or whatever else? How do you let go of patterns? How do you let go of those habits, that groove, those grooved memories that can either make you happy, unhappy, or just plain old angry? That's all stuff that's in every one of us. And, that's not easy. That takes time. There are no quick 5-second cures. It just sometimes takes time. Look, it took a lifetime to build these patterns. Sometimes it takes a little effort to get rid of those patterns, but it's all patterns. And really the way we composite and put everything together and the way we deal with that and get rid of the grooving in the brain and everything else, that's how we survive as individuals, as people, and how we work around the issues that face us or the challenges or how we accept, success or lack of success or anything else. And, we are very robotic as people. Some people say that we're asleep, and I'd say probably that's the closest. A lot of human beings live life partially asleep. They're not
the
active.
sad thing is we want to a lot of times.
Yeah, or they're just kind of in an active semi-zombie state. Look at crowd behaviors. They've done lots of tests on crowds. Crowds are not conscious. If they were, they wouldn't do anything of what they're doing. Crowds are responding emotionally to everything. And they can be manipulated very, very well. And that's why governments and other entities are constantly manipulating the crowds. And it can get really scary when you manipulate crowds because they can be very destructive.
Now, we've talked about this before, and I think you've mentioned it. It's Charles Mackay's Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And it's very interesting. Again, if you're alert, awake, in control of your brain, then a crowd won't affect you that much. The only thing it'll affect you with is you don't want to be around a crowd because it's a negative feeling or a negative vibe, and it usually turns into that or can. Now, occasionally you'll have a crowd that everybody's happy. Okay, that's good. Go with it. But more often than not, crowd behavior tends to be that of a more negative behavior. And that's because people manipulate crowds.
Right. I mean, I was watching some things from Woodstock, and they said what was amazing, it was not violent. Everybody was, peace and love and happiness. But that was definitely crowd control.
Yeah, it was in one way or another. And most of that was by drugs. So
I look at those pictures, I think gross, but it's just my perspective.
Yep. But anyway, so that's a little bit on patterns, and we can talk a lot about patterns and how we learn, how we don't learn, and that's really what learning is all about. How you archive new patterns, how you change maybe some patterns, and how you process those patterns, and then build new patterns. Because again, pattern access really comes down to how well you're connecting in the cortex, which stores our memories, to everything else, every other part of the brain. How do those connections work? And a lot of times there's damage in the brain where connections aren't retrieved correctly, just like a hard drive. They're not retrieved correctly, and you get either delusional behavior, you get incorrect memories, whatever can come from that. And it doesn't mean that people are deliberately trying to do this. It's just the connections aren't right. That's all. And they haven't really figured out a way to fix that. All they can do is sort of dull it. Because how do you fix all the connections? We don't know how to do that yet.
Do you remember the TV series Numbers? And it was all about algorithms and patterns and solving crimes and behaviors.
Yeah. That was kind of cool.
It was.
They did that movie also. I think it was called. What was it called? It wasn't Numbers, but it was with Nicolas Cage.
Oh. Yes, I think
it was about the end. It was about the end of the world, but he deciphers the numbers and knows when the terrorism is going to happen and this is going to happen and when the ship takes them all away. Or it takes the children away. It was pretty good. It wasn't science. It was something else, but it was a pretty good movie. It was interesting. It was all based on numbers, and he analyzed those. His daughter analyzed the numbers, so that was pretty good. Well, I think we're at that pattern where we end the show.
Yes. Well, this has been a pleasure, and we'll have Dr. Benish on when we can conquer the gremlins, but it's been great to talk, right?
Yeah, and we should talk a little bit more about that next time we're together like this, about learning theory and how this really affects learning theory.
Oh, definitely.
I think that'll be fun.
Oh, I agree.
In the meantime, if you're watching the show, Please subscribe. Give us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. Susan, until next time, have a good one. And we'll see you on Life Edge next week. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.